Thank you, Shamika. I first of all wanted to thank Josh for this paper. I think it comes at an important time when India is among the few countries in the world, because of its size and the size of its population, which has prioritized using the digital platform for development. And therefore, the whole issue of data flows has what we call a development dimension. From your paper, Josh, I wanted to pick up three aspects. One is the concept of digital divides, which you have spoken of in the paper, linked with what we call connectivity issues, which you've also touched upon, and the impact on the digital divide and connectivity of the flow of data as far as India is concerned. The second is about what you've spoken of, big cloud, big data, cloud computing as the cost-efficient way for increasing the participation of Indian enterprises in international trade, for example. But along with that are the issues that you have flagged of privacy and the relevance of data flows in that matrix. And the third is something that I think is important for us to speak of when we speak of cross-border data flows, which is how do we bring about effective international cooperation to ensure the effectiveness of cross-border data flows. And I think I'd like to touch on these three things. The first is just a map. I find it very useful when I talk to students about what is the critical information infrastructure globally, because most people assume that data just flows, but it today flows basically along these underwater cables. And as you can see, they are in many ways a mirror of our common desire to ensure freedom of navigation, which we talk of in the Indo-Pacific context. But data flows need to be ensured, free flow of data needs to be ensured. And I think that the only thing that I would emphasize in this map is the interdependence of all countries through which data flows. There is probably not, there's no opportunity to cut off a data flow without impacting on the integrity of data throughout the system. Now, in terms of India, the focus of your paper is very interesting and very relevant in terms of the economics of data flows, in which you look at enterprises and the role of governments in regulating data flows. But in terms of the digital divide and connectivity, there is a dimension in India of data flows which is focused on the citizen. It's a citizen-centric focus on data flows. And this is because of the problems that we acknowledge and that you've put up in your map as well, in your chart as well, of internet penetration and connectivity in India. 34% of our population is right now digitally enabled or empowered. And that leaves a huge amount of space which has to be filled up. And in that context, we have this platform called Digital India, of which there are three basic priorities. One is infrastructure, which is seen as a utility for every citizen. So it is more than just an enterprise or more than just government. It is citizen-oriented. Governance and services on demand are again citizen-oriented. And then the digital empowerment of citizens through this biometric database, which we call Aadhaar, which is integrated with Digital India. Now, the Telecom and Regulatory Authority of India, which is probably right now the regulator which looks into these issues, but which may have to cede space to a cyber regulator eventually, has given 5 key priorities for India's digital activity. The first is connectivity, and that is, in the global ranking, we are 132 in the world for broadband penetration and 156 for wireless broadband penetration out of 179, which actually shows you that India still has a long way to go to reach the upper levels of connectivity. The second is, and there's been a vibrant debate on data and regulation of data, restrictions on data. The TRAI recommendation is for free data for all content and ISPs and available to the maximum addressable consumer market. So they are in favor of the free flow of data. The issue of access. Now, this issue of access there are two aspects to access. One is affordability, and the other is infrastructure gaps. But in the process of studying issues of access in India, we also have to talk about access in terms of what we call digital literacy. Every bit of data that is generated, and more as domain names have become available in Indian languages, now you have data which is also going to flow in Indian languages. And that's going to be quite a large volume of data. So what is the digital literacy in India which will exploit the flow of data inside our country and then use that flow of data for cross-border data flows? That is something that we need to look at. The fourth is empowerment. They look at data and as enabling empowerment of our citizens. And the fifth is, of course, what you've mentioned of integrating this vision into implementing the Sustainable Development Goals, which we've all agreed to by 2030. Now, when I come to big data, and this is something that I saw in a Stanford University publication recently, you see the trust. The issue basically is of trust, of where this data is stored. Now, this shows USA, UK, Canada, they feel secure and trust in the data that is stored on cloud platforms. You go to Europe, Germany is the least trusting, according to this study that's been done in Stanford, of the storage of data in cloud platforms. And in the case of India, you see that we have some concerns about trust, which you have addressed in terms of data localization issues, but this trust is something that is very important. Now, there are two issues here which I thought would be relevant for your consideration. One is the privacy and security of data, because data, the generation of data by government, when it is used for the market, needs to have some kind of oversight, whether we call it regulatory or whether we call it self-imposed, but there has to be some kind of oversight on the use of this data. And the second is the issue of small and medium enterprises. Now, we noted the work done on the contribution of small and medium enterprises in India to the kind of international trade activity of India. But the fact remains that because of their inherent limitations, small and medium enterprises are unable to use the platforms which have been mentioned in your paper of the big multinationals without facing issues which are endemic to their own way of functioning, especially issues of which we call jurisdictional issues, if they have some problems. Now, in terms of privacy, we have made some progress. There is a Supreme Court ruling on August 2017, which makes privacy part of the fundamental rights of Indian citizens under Article 21. Last year and early this year, we had a multi-stakeholder group looking at privacy issues in terms of cyber norms for India. And that recommendation is for the global flows and exchange of data must be encouraged and enabled while protecting personal and collective ownership over data, including intellectual property rights, and ensuring that regulatory and other kinds of legal access is available to the country, authorities of the country of origin. This goes back to that issue of MLATs and jurisdiction that you mentioned. And of course, we all are proud of the fact that we uphold the right to privacy online, and we regularly sponsor with Sweden a resolution in the General Assembly asserting this. So that is what marks India's commitment to privacy globally. Now, you know, there are two parts to the use of cloud platforms. One is what you mentioned about access to, you know, the strengths, the resilience of the cloud platforms by individuals, enterprises. And there's also the other aspect which UNCTAD has pointed out in its report last year, that companies that control the data may actually acquire an undue advantage in how they use that data. So these are the two parameters within which we sort of address the issues of cloud computing and data flows in the country. And the approach is not to kill the goose that lays the golden eggs. And we are aware that $150 billion worth of revenue are generated by, as you said, the flow of data, Indian IT and ITES enabled services. So we have advocated through the existing regulator, TRAI, a light touch for regulation. It's that we are not coming in favor of some kind of hard regulation like a neighboring country in China. We have a different approach which encourages innovation, growth, research, while looking at the integrity and security of cyber systems. The third element, which actually was provoked by your references to the MLAT, and having dealt with these MLAT issues with the United States, I completely endorse your point that it is time consuming. It is also technically very challenging to pursue MLAT cooperation because data itself is stored for a fixed number of days by companies on their servers, and then after that, that data does not become available. We may not even reach the 10-month period that you have referred to. We need, there is an initiative going on in the United States. The Hewlett Foundation was here a few months ago. We talked of upgrading and bringing MLATs into the digital age. So we can use digital technology to upgrade the way MLATs work. And you don't have to go through the pre-digital form of going through MLATs. And but from that flows the issue of effective international cooperation. And this is something that is critical when you argue in favor of a light regulatory touch on data flows. Then you must have an effective enforcement mechanism or an effective regulatory mechanism globally. And this is what I would like to end with, that this is part of a larger discussion. You know that in June last year, attempts by governments to create a regulatory normative system for securing cyberspace got gridlocked because of the conflict between the United States and China, Russia. I mean, this big power conflict that's going on in the world. That leaves countries which are outside the big power conflict in a situation in which, if they have chosen, like we have chosen to adopt the digital platform for development, with the issue of how do you secure this digital platform for development. And I think what we need to do is to pool the work that we have done in the United Nations governmental group for securing cyberspace, but also bring in the kind of proposals which have been made while looking at how we are implementing this agenda for socio-economic development, the Tunis agenda and Agenda 2030. There's a lot of work going on in that. UNCTAD has made references to that. And the work which is about to come on to us when we start discussing a regulatory framework, a rules-based framework for electronic commerce. I think we need to merge these efforts and eventually end up with an international convention on cyberspace, which will look at the rights and obligations of all the stakeholders, which means governments, businesses, which are the two which you have mentioned in your paper, but also academia and civil society, individual citizens. I think that all four need to be reflected in this. Thank you.